Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Kasloff, and welcome to Smells Like Teen Horror. And this is a new segment on the show I'm going to be doing. I guess I'm going to call it Real Horror or something else when I think of a better name. And I'm going to get right into it. I have a very good friend who is a awesome YouTuber. Links will be in the description. It's Elizabeth. How's it going, Elizabeth?
Hey Eric, great to be here.
Thanks for coming on. So, when we started the Saturday Afternoon Society, you mentioned during one of them that you wanted to come on the Something About the Unknown podcast because you grew up in a haunted house. So, let's just get right into that.
Yeah, so I grew up in an old Victorian in a little province called Newfoundland, and it's way over on the east coast of Canada. So it's the easterlymost province in Canada. And it's a really, really old city. So it was founded in 1497. So tons and tons of history in this little city. And so the house that I grew up in was built in 1902. And the whole area around there is just a complete vibe. So really old part of the city. There was a cemetery across the street, or there is a cemetery across the street from, I believe it started around the 1820s.
Oh,
So really super old. And so my whole upbringing was an entire vibe growing up in this haunted Victorian that was built in 1902.
yeah.
And originally it was owned by a really prominent family in the area. And when my father's family bought the house from them, they were super Catholic. So they had all kinds of religious iconography and like pillars and angels and statues and stuff in the house. And then my father's family bought it from them. And the whole haunting experience happened way before I was even born. So this is like generational stories of stuff
Whoa.
that's been handed down.
Get into it. What's the story behind the house?
Yeah, so I think just the whole thing is there wasn't really anything ever super evil there. There were a couple of things that scared me, but the haunting I would say is mainly what you would call like residual haunting. So you would experience bumps and bangs and see things, but it wasn't overly sinister, which is a good thing because but still, I mean, people, when they see strange stuff, they still get freaked out. So
Yeah, it's like I know the different types of hauntings, but still, no matter what, even if it's a friendly spirit, it's
yeah,
still scary.
it's super scary. So, when my father's family lived there, my father has a really large family. So I believe he has nine siblings. So when he was living there with his parents and everything, one of his brothers decided he was going to bring his girlfriend back to the house, and she was going to spend the night. But because they were full up with kids and everything, she was like, "Yeah, I'm cool just to sleep on the couch downstairs." So she, decided to go on to sleep, and everybody went upstairs to their bedrooms. And she started. Now I have to say that the staircase in this house was a whole character. So each one of the steps had a very distinctive creak or squeak that would come from it. So even when I lived there, you could tell which steps somebody was walking up.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was your quintessential haunted house with the creepy staircase.
Yeah.
And so anyway, everyone was gone on to bed, and she heard someone on the staircase. She thought it was her boyfriend, my father's brother, that was coming down the stairs, and he thought it was her coming up the
Oh
stairs.
my goodness.
So when she looked over from the couch that she was sleeping on, she saw a woman that was dressed head to toe in black and had a black veil over her face, and she
Wow.
was floating down the staircase. So she absolutely lost her mind. And my father's brother, like I said, was already awake and heard her. And so anyway, this veiled woman came down the stairs and went out both front doors. And she never could, because they eventually got married, and she never spent one moment after dark in that house ever
I
again.
could imagine so. I mean, I was immediately getting flashbacks of the haunting of Hill House. The
Yeah.
bent neck lady was like, in fact, that whole house was the first thing that popped into my head when you mentioned the house you grew up in.
Yeah. Yes, very much so.
Because I
And
love Victorian houses just for the look of them alone.
yes.
They're all breathtaking. So let's move a little forward to your experiences in the house.
So I'll have to back it up a little bit because
Okay.
funny enough, I had my own experiences, but my family, they said when I was brought into the house as a baby, they said the house was settled. So they never ever experienced any hauntings after I was brought into the house, but I did. So just backing it up a little bit into 1979, when my mom and dad bought the house off my father's family. And funny enough, they actually moved in on Halloween night.
That's awesome.
They moved in on Halloween night in 1979. And almost from the very moment that they moved into the house, my brother, who had never sleptwalked a day in his life, started sleepwalking. So
Oh,
the crazy thing was that, just to give you a little bit of the layout, when you come down over that big staircase, you come into like a front foyer, and then there's an inside door that leads into a porch area. And then there were two outside doors, a big wooden door, and it had one of those chains, the old-fashioned chains that you can lock it.
yeah.
Um, and then it had a screen door on the outside. And sorry, when they moved in, the chain wasn't there, but there were three doors. So my brother had gotten down over the stairs, went out through the front three doors outside,
Whoa.
and started walking up the street. And my parents were sound asleep. They had no idea he'd gotten out of the house. And my mom heard a little tiny voice calling out, "Mommy,"
Holy
from up the
cow.
road. Yeah. And she's still blown away to this day that she was able to hear him. But the crazy thing is that he never called her mommy a day in his life.
Whoa.
So my dad, she woke up first, woke up my father, and he always jokes because he was like, I was trying to run down the stairs and pull on a pair of jeans at the same time. So they went out and got him, and he was whispering in a very low voice, and they brought him back to bed. So this happened over consecutive nights. So my dad actually installed that chain on the
Okay.
on the front door to try to prevent him from getting out. And it was because my brother was 7 years old at the time, so he was super small, and even if he stood on a chair, he wouldn't be able to reach this chain. But he kept getting out of the house.
Oh my goodness.
So they were like, they had no idea, and they were terrified that either somebody was going to pick him up
Oh,
outside,
yeah.
or that he was going to get lost, or I mean, this was November by this time in Canada, so there was snow on the ground.
Oh, yeah.
And so they actually notified a fisherman friend of theirs who would drive down to the docks super early in the morning. And they noticed that he was getting out at exactly 3:15 every single morning. So an interesting thing that kind of ties into that whole thing, my brother was 7 years old at the time. And my mom was talking to a neighbor that lived up the road. It was a really, really old lady at the time. And she grew up when that family originally lived there. And she told my mom the story that in their backyard, they had a well that serviced that whole area with drinking water. And that family had a little girl who, at 7 years old, drowned in the well.
Oh, wow.
And so she was the exact same age as my brother.
Sure.
And so my mom was like, she was putting all of these things together in her head, thinking like, is this somehow related? And at the same time, my mom also started to see the specter of this woman in black in the house as well. She was never ever scary, but she was just kind of there. And that particular house, they used to have wakes in the house where they would lay somebody out after they died
Okay.
in the parlor area. And she would see the specter of this woman in black come out of that parlor area. So she was thinking that maybe since that was such a tragic death of this little girl, that somehow the little girl and the mother were still stuck in this plane, but they couldn't find each other. So it all ties together with my brother calling out for his mommy from up the road,
Yeah.
like looking around for, and the whole thing was completely crazy. So my dad ended up jerry rigging like an alarm system almost to break my brother of the habit of sleepwalking. And it was after he did that, and after they found out what was going on in the house with this little girl who drowned, eventually he did stop sleepwalking.
Now, do you think, I don't want to say it was a possession, but maybe a spirit manipulation thing going
Yeah,
on with your brother?
to me, I'm thinking maybe this little girl was somehow using my brother's body to try to find her mother, who was perhaps this woman that was shrouded in black.
Yeah.
And they couldn't find each other. So the whole story just seems like it's a little bit too much to not be a coincidence between the whole situation.
Now,
And like
did
they
you,
said, they were never scared. They were never terrified of any of this that was going on. It was just very much a matter of fact sort of thing.
did your brother to them ever mention having like an imaginary friend who resembled a little girl?
That was me, actually.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, so my brother didn't. But they continued to have haunting sort of activities going on in the house. Other people would come in the house and say that they saw things. Um, we had one situation where my uncle was staying with my family, and he was sleeping on the couch. So it seems like people who sleep downstairs have
Yeah,
these sort
yeah.
of experiences in the main area of the
Like,
house.
well, maybe because that's where the wakes were, there's a lot of
It could
residual
be.
energy right
Yep.
in that room.
Yep. And the staircase was a big area of activity. Every night they used to hear somebody come in through the front doors every single night, and you could hear each door open and close, and then somebody walk up the stairs. And before they made the turn to come up the second set of stairs, it would just fade away. So
Yeah.
that was every single night. So on this particular night, my uncle was staying with them. He was sleeping in this downstairs area in the living room. And in Victorians, these are very large rooms, right?
Yeah.
So in front of the couch, there was a 2-layer coffee table. So it had like a bottom shelf, and then you would have the top shelf that you would use for your drinks.
Yeah.
And my family at the time had an entire encyclopedia set that was on the bottom layer of this.
Kids, for anybody under, well, any kid listening, an encyclopedia was like Wikipedia, but a book,
But in books,
and
yeah,
they were ridiculously expensive.
you would buy literally one letter at a time.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember this is often, remember that commercial of like the kid in the white room talking about, oh, but the Encyclopedia Britannica commercial? This like dorky looking guy.
Well, and it's funny because I remember even when I was in school, when they would start to go out of date, and then it would have wrong information and
Yeah,
stuff in
yeah,
them.
yeah. Like I remember, we'll get back to it, but the last encyclopedia put out, the last thing it talked about was 9/11. So up into the 2000s, they were still making them.
Yeah.
But back to the good stuff, back to the ghosty stuff.
Yeah. So he was lying on the couch. Everyone had gone to bed. And so you have this coffee table with this huge encyclopedia set on it. And he was sound asleep. And my mom and dad upstairs heard him yell and scream and this huge bang from downstairs. So my dad went down, and my uncle was as white as a sheet. And he said, someone kicked the table from one end of the room to the other end of the
Oh,
room, and there were books scattered all over the place.
wow.
Yeah, and so he it was crazy. So they set the coffee table back up and put the books back on it. And between the two of them, they were struggling to lift, like, because that would have been a great amount of weight,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So whatever spirit had that much force, like it must have been really manifested at the time to be able to basically kick a coffee table right
yeah.
across the entire room. So anyway, he ended up leaving that night, and I don't believe he ever went back after dark either.
Well, I'm just curious. I would love to know the times all of these happen because I know around the 3 a.m.
That's 3 a.m. mark. Yeah,
is when most hauntings take place. It's like I've heard it called the witching
the
hour
witching
at
hour.
some
Yes.
points, or the other words for it. I think do you think it's because it's midnight on the West Coast while it's technic
Well, they say that the 3 a.m. mark is called the witching hour because it's the exact opposite of 3 p.m. supposedly when Jesus died.
Okay, 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 I get it. Yeah, yeah.
So it's the mocking of the Trinity, they say.
See, that's what I remember hearing also. It's like usually when you hear knocks, it's usually three
In
knocks.
threes or 3 a.m., that
Yeah,
whole thing.
yeah,
Yeah. So I would have to ask my parents if they can remember what time that happened. But I know with my brother doing the sleepwalking, it
yeah.
was the exact same time every single morning.
That's again, that's always fascinated me about that hour. I even remember as a kid being afraid of that time.
Of that time.
Yeah. But me, it was more midnight, but but then as I got older, 3 a.m. started freaking me out.
Well, it was funny because I can't remember what movie I was watching. This was maybe 20 years ago. And it had something to do with that 3 a.m. mark, that stuff was happening. And I remember I woke up during the night after watching this movie. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I really
Ooh,
had to go to the bathroom.
ooh,
I
yeah.
refused to get up and go to the bathroom.
Remember The Conjuring, that
Yeah.
story also, everything started at 3 a.m.
Yep. Yep.
So all this is going on, and you weren't born yet while some
Well,
of
I
this
wasn't
stuff.
born yet at this point.
So when did you start to experience stuff?
So I was born in 1982. So that was 3 years after my family had moved into this house. So they experienced stuff pretty much on a nightly basis with footsteps on the stairs and specters of women in black and kids sleepwalking and angry ghosts and the whole thing. And my mom actually wasn't supposed to have me. They didn't expect that I was going to survive even pregnancy. So I don't know if that has something to do with my empathetic sort of attachment to the spirit world.
I was about to think that. So you identify as an empath?
I do. Yeah.
How hard was high school for you? We'll get into that in a little bit, having that gift or ability, but back to this stuff.
Yeah. So starting way back at the beginning. So my mom still to this day, she says, as soon as I brought you over the threshold of the house, she said, we never experienced a single thing after. The house was completely settled. She said, even the air felt different in the house. So, but what she didn't know, and what was very matter of fact for me as a child, was I was the one that started having the experiences. So I very distinctly remember having several imaginary friends from what you would think they would be.
Yeah.
So there was a little boy and a little girl who were in the house, who I would have tea parties with. And my mom and dad, because this was only recently that I even told them the experiences that I had as a child. And the little girl and the little boy were very real to me. Very, very, like they were solid as you or I, like they weren't see-through. They didn't seem like ghosts. And my mom even told me a few months ago that she said, we thought that you were just having like a really extensive conversation with yourself. She was like, but it was full on conversations over this tea party, these tea parties that you would have. And I would typically have them in the dining room. And so I would usually play with this little boy and little girl. And then there was another little girl who used to come through the back fence. So every day when I was out in the yard, my dad was a stay-at-home dad, so he would let me go play on my swing set and stuff. And every day, this little girl would come through the back fence, and we would play and play for hours, and she would leave through the back fence. And so I started asking her, I said, like, where do you live?
How old were you at this time?
Uh, Probably between the ages of like 4 and 5.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
So
and
still old enough where that veil between
yeah,
real and unreal, but old enough to start putting together things like
putting two and two
I
together.
well, like,
Yeah.
oh, this is where I live, understanding where that, people have their own houses, stuff like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you were coherent to the world around you, the way basic things work at this point.
Yes. So it was funny because when I started asking, because I didn't ask at first, we were just playing. But then I started asking because I would come out of my house and go up around the corner, and I would go to other people's houses like you do back in the 80s on my bike, and we would
Yeah.
play and stuff. So I started asking her, where do you live? And she would point just towards the back fence, which behind us at the time was just grassland, like there wasn't anything there. And I thought she was pointing towards the houses up on the next street, which if you went through that grassland and up over the hill, you could get to this other area. So she just kept pointing. She didn't say what house, she didn't say what number or anything. She would always just point. So one day I took it upon myself that I was going to go around our property and go through the grassland to try to get up to that area. And I ended up having to turn around and go home because, for one, my feet were getting wet because it was kind of marshy.
Yeah.
And the grass was very, very high, and it was that dead kind of really sharp grass, and it started cutting up my legs. And I started asking the little kids that were up on that street, who were also my friends, like, where does this little girl live? She looks like this. And nobody knew
Oh
who I was
man.
talking about. And stuff started clicking together in my head, and then she never came back after.
Wow.
Yeah, she
So,
just stopped coming.
and I'm putting this together. This was the little girl that was talking to your brother, the girl from the that
It could
drowned.
be because I actually didn't say this, but when my dad was digging fence post holes out in that area of the backyard, he actually dug up a ring that would have fit on top of a well. So we knew that the stories were likely true.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so it's always because I do believe that small children and animals are able to see through the different levels of the world, the
Mhm.
our physical world and the spiritual plane. And one thing I've always felt is my mom taught me would say this, and I believe it too. Whenever you see like a baby giggling or smiling at nothing, they would say that it's the angels watching over them. Or
Yeah.
I totally buy into stuff like that because I'm very open spiritually. Like my belief is more Christian, but I'm open to other beliefs. I believe
Mhm.
that there's everything, when it's a good positive thing. I'm not going to say like, people who go, I like to sacrifice, things, animals to Satan. No, you are not doing anything right. But I'm not bigoted when it comes to my belief system.
Mhm.
So all of this is going on when you're a kid. Anything else like,
So that was the very benign sort of thing. Same thing that my parents used to experience. And my mom, even to this day, she says they were our ghosts. They didn't scare us. Like it was very matter of fact. And so it didn't scare me when I was growing up. But funny enough, when I started getting old enough to have sleepovers and that sort of thing, I would always be the one that was telling the ghost stories. And my
Okay,
parents couldn't figure out why in the middle of the night, the little girls would always want to go home. They
that's
were always
funny.
crying. It was because I was telling the spooky stories from the house.
So now, do you think that all of this is what got you into be all the spooky stuff that you're into
Well,
growing up in that
it's definitely a
environment?
factor. It's definitely a factor. You know, I mean, it was very, like I said, it was very matter of fact at the time. I did also have some scary sort of things that were happening as well. And then so it, like I said, it was a whole vibe. The cemetery across the street, which I used to play in frequently. I still to this day love cemeteries.
They're very peaceful.
They're very, very peaceful. And as someone who is very open and sensitive to energies, it is a very peaceful place. And you know, it was an old house. It had a lot of character. There were these stories. And then I started getting into watching shows like In Search of or Unsolved Mysteries and stuff. So it kind of
Remember
built kind of a
sightings?
foundation. Pardon me?
Did you have sightings in Canada? It was kind of like Unsolved Mysteries, but it was only spooky stuff. They never did like missing people.
Oh no, it doesn't sound familiar, but I wonder, can you find it
Yeah,
somewhere?
I'll look it up
Um,
and I'll send it to you.
that would be awesome because I love those shows that have to do with just the
All
spooky
right. So,
stories.
question, was there any like people, either your family or people who would stay over who would experience, I hate using the medical term, but we both know what it really is, sleep paralysis?
Yes, actually. I've experienced sleep paralysis in my lifetime. But funny enough, sleep paralysis and an actual spooky experience I found were two different things. They were two completely different
Okay, okay,
experiences. And most of the experiences that we had, like people were completely awake. They were standing up, they were walking around,
okay, okay.
you know, that sort of thing. But I do have to say that there was something spooky that later on in life, I think I figured out what it was, and we'll get to that. But I would have something that was under my bed that would be like an entire fist that would punch up through
Oh,
my mattress. So that's the nights that I would run out of my room and go stay in my brother's room and or go wake up my mom and dad. But usually I would go to my brother because he was a bit more understanding and not do the whole, oh, go back to your room kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
You know, but whatever that was the only thing that ever scared me.
Now, do you think, well, that's interesting. Do you think if it would have, I'm trying to put this the right way. If you had not been, if you had lived in like a normal house before that, but then moved into there, you would have been more frightened by all of this stuff. Because if it wasn't like the norm for you,
Maybe, maybe, but like my parents lived in other houses that weren't haunted and then moved in there and it didn't scare them. They said it was a very matter of fact sort of thing. Um, but I think it all has to do with the energy, like whatever energy you feel, whether it's benign or whether it's actually like evil or heavy. People say that evil entities feel very heavy, you know, so I think it has a lot to do with that as well. But
I'm
even after
so
we,
glad that you're pointing out that there is evil entities because so
yes,
many people don't want to admit that. But
yes.
there, no, there, if there's light, there has to be darkness, no matter what.
Yeah, and like for me, like my belief is not a Christian belief, so I don't believe in hell necessarily.
Okay.
Um, but I do believe that there are non-human entities that are
Oh,
on this
yes,
plane, that
yes,
you can tell the difference between a benign spirit, like someone who's passed on.
yes.
Sometimes spirits who have passed on are not so nice because you still have murderers and all that that pass
Yeah.
on. But when you're experiencing something that's negative or demonic or a non-human spirit, it's completely different. It's totally, totally different. But from what we experienced when I was a kid was very benign. Now, when we moved out of the house, all hell broke loose.
Okay, let's get into that. Let's get into this thought. Chapter two.
Chapter two. So we left the house and whatever spirits that were there that were appeased when I was brought into the house weren't very happy. So the guy that moved in afterwards, my dad went back a couple of weeks after we had moved, and he was talking to the next door neighbor, and just chit-chatting on how things were going and all that sort of thing. And the guy came out of the house and he said, "You're the guy that used to live here, right?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "This house is effing haunted. You know that, right?" And he said, "Yeah." And they actually had two blessings or exorcisms done on the house because they used to experience footsteps and shaking and everything to the point where like they couldn't even stay there. He ended up beating up all the windows out of the house because he was driven mad.
Whoa.
The garage that my dad built out back, I'm not sure if he burned it down or it burned down mysteriously, but apparently it was very, very bad when we left. And funny enough, even real estate agents know about this house.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's very well known for having spirit activity.
Now, do you think it's because of, like you were saying, the complications with your birth, the whole being able to see through both? When you came there to that house, it was like you said, they were appeased because it's one of us, but not one of us. Then you
Right.
leaving, it's kind of like if you take away a baby's toy and it starts crying and throws a tantrum, like, we want her back. We're not right without her. So that
Yeah, and
sort
I
of a
mean it
thing.
could be something like that, or like maybe because my whole family was so
Open.
um
Yeah.
open and just like, these are our ghosts, they're part of the family, this is everyday activity, that sort of thing. I don't know, but apparently when we left it was not a good situation.
And I'm guessing likewise, the ghosts saw you as their people in a way, kind of like, Rogers over here is my dog and I'm his person.
Yeah. Yeah. So they say, and I totally believe this as well, that if you have someone who has psychic ability or is a spiritualist or an empath or whatever, spirits on the other side can see them almost like a beacon. Like you kind of
Yeah.
attract them, right? Because they know that you can sense them. They know you can speak with them. So I think that maybe had something to do with it too.
Well, now, other than from the house, have you experienced any other
Oh yes.
hauntings? Okay, let's hear
Yep.
some of that stuff because you're an
So
empath. I want to know more about that.
yeah, so I can sense like energies in rooms just with people. I'm very open to interpreting people's energies. Um, but no matter where I walk in, sometimes it feels like I'm even walking into a wall because the spiritual energy will be so prevalent or it'll be so heavy. There was a historical home back in Newfoundland, um, that a friend of mine worked in for a while, and there was a particular room because she brought me in and she was showing me around, and there were a couple of the bedrooms upstairs, and there was one I walked into it and literally walked back out. She said, "Why did you pick that room?" And I said, I couldn't do it, like it was just too off. And she said someone had actually hung themselves in that room.
Wow. Now, did
So
she
like,
bring you there just to check it out or to check it, like to see it or to, like, check it out? Like,
yeah, no, it wasn't anything like that behind it. Like I literally just wanted to see the
oh,
place.
okay, okay.
But that like I don't think either one of us were expecting that kind of reaction because I think she was kind of taken aback too when I said like I don't want to go in that room. Um, but when I moved to Alberta, so Alberta is way over, kind of almost on the west coast of Canada, so very, very far away from home.
That's
Um,
one of the places I've heard of because, again, being a big wrestling fan, one of my favorite wrestlers, Bret Hart, is from Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
oh yes, yeah, yep. So that's where I am, is in
Oh,
Calgary.
okay.
Um, so
And is the
when
Flames still there, the hockey
yeah,
team? Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
Calgary
yeah.
Flames, and we have the CFL team, not NFL, but the CFL. We have the Calgary Stampeders.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah. So when I first moved here, I was staying with my brother. and his family. So he was married, he had a wife and two kids, two, like they were really, really little girls at the time. So until I kind of, excuse me, until I kind of got on my feet, I was staying with them. And his wife knew that I was very sensitive to things. She knew all of the stories about the place that we grew up. And she's very spiritualistic, and she doesn't do well with anything that has to do with hauntings. It scares her. So when I moved in with them, and of course, I think this has to do a lot with the fact that I was kind of uprooted. My own energies were off a little bit. So when I moved in with them, the whole family started to experience all sorts of things happening in the
Okay.
house that they didn't have happen before.
Yeah.
So she started seeing a little girl who she thought was her own daughter run from one room into another room, giggling. And when she would go in, there would be nobody there, and her own kids are in bed, or
Whoa.
whatever the situation was. I started seeing the same sort of thing. The energies in the house were completely off. There was one night where I was gone out and my brother was also on night shift. And so she was home alone. Her two kids were up in bed, and she started hearing banging coming from the basement, almost like somebody was rearranging furniture down there. And she
Whoa.
actually moved the coffee table like in front of the basement door. She was totally freaked out, called my brother to come home. He's like, I can't leave work. And so she ended up staying up the whole night with the lights on and watching the basement door because of all the noises that were happening down there. But the craziest thing that we experienced was one of the girls had a birthday, and she got one of those, those aluminum helium balloons.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it was out in the kitchen, had been in the same corner for days. And you know how it starts to lose its helium, so it starts to come down from the
Yeah.
ceiling a bit. And you could say that it was air currents, but it moved very strangely. So I was sitting on one couch. She was sitting on another couch out in the living room. And we both were wide awake. We were watching TV, and we watched this balloon come out of the kitchen, just like somebody had it by the ribbon and they were leading it along. The ribbon was at an angle. So it was just like somebody was leading it along. We watched it come out of the kitchen. It went all the way across the living room, turned, went up 3 or 4 stairs, turned again, went up more stairs, went to the back of the hallway, underneath the lintel of the room that I was staying
Whoa.
in, and went to the back corner of that room.
Do you think this was your friend from when you were a kid, like maybe followed you?
It could be. It could be. Or it might have been whatever we were seeing, this little toddler that was running around
Oh, okay.
their
Okay.
house, that she would see and I would see. So we don't know if it was this. I think it was something else though.
Because
I
you
think that,
said it's, I didn't know they were toddlers. I was confused at that.
yeah.
I thought they were like, little kids, not babies.
So that situation, I think it was another child spirit. Because of there was an age difference from what I experienced as a kid. But that she still tells that story about where we were sitting there. And like I said, you could say it was air currents, but for it to make 3 90-degree
Yeah,
turns.
that's something. And there's like, I forget what it's called, but point of interest for ghost. I forget, it's something that'll attract a ghost to it. A little kid would be attracted to something like that.
To a balloon, yeah.
Yeah, these ghost hunters I know in England, one of their spirit meter things is a minion that they converted into a EKG meter, because when they talk to child spirits, they know they would be attracted to minions from the Despicable Me movies.
Yeah, yeah.
So they use that a lot.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So that's an interesting point. Yeah, a child spirit would definitely be interested in a balloon. And like I said, the little ribbon that was hanging off of the balloon,
Yeah.
it was just like it was being led along.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did the other person think when they saw this? How scared were they?
Yeah, she was terrified. She was definitely terrified. And there was one day when she actually said to me, what the F did you bring into my house?
Wow.
Yeah. I heard that a couple of times growing up because people are all interested until they actually start experiencing something at the same time, like if you're in their house. So that one really sticks out in my head. But after I moved out and I moved in with my boyfriend at the time, who became my ex-husband, we moved in a house that wasn't far away from them, and we started actually experiencing poltergeist activity.
Oh, okay.
So this is where I experienced a haunting that was completely different than what I experienced as a kid. So we started experiencing things that were a little bit more on the sinister side, and you could feel,
Yeah.
that heavy atmosphere. It was thick and it was negative. And so as soon as you walked into this house, and it kept building up over time, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I have a theory of what was going on there. At first, I thought it was a haunting, but then afterwards, I think I figured out what was going on. But just kind of starting at the beginning, we started experiencing things like doorknobs rattling, toilets flushing on their own, taps like water taps being left on or coming on by themselves, cupboards being left open. So that's kind of where it started. Just
More
weird
what you
things.
would see in the movies type of
Yeah.
hauntings.
Yeah. And then we started experiencing the specters, which were they weren't they were human shaped, but they were completely black. They didn't have features.
Wow.
So unlike what I used to experience as a child and what I've experienced in other places, this was not a human haunting, like not a human spirit haunting.
Yeah.
So we started he would wake up sometimes during the night or during the day, because he used to work shift work. So sometimes it was nights, sometimes it was days. And he said there would be something standing at the foot of the bed, and he
Oh,
would just pull the covers over his head. But he was one of those people that was kind of like a skeptical believer. Like sometimes he would believe it, but sometimes he'd try
yeah.
to
Yeah.
explain it away.
Rationalize it.
Yeah. And
Like, I want to believe, like, the Fox Mulder
yeah.
quote.
Um, and then we started seeing this specter. And there was one night I was lying in bed reading. And so I had a small reading light just hooked onto my book, and I was reading, but the rest of the room was dark. And I saw what I thought was my husband open the door of the bedroom, look in, and close the door again. And I heard steps going down over the staircase. So I went out and I said, "Did you want something?" And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, you just came upstairs, opened the door, and didn't say anything, didn't do anything." And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I was sitting on the couch the whole time."
Wow.
So, but that whole situation started getting really bad, where it was sort of a shapeshifter. So sometimes he would hear me calling out to him, or I would hear him calling out to me, but we weren't, either the other person wasn't even in the house, or we weren't calling out.
Wow.
So this thing, it actually started to call out to the dogs. And the dog would go running off with their tail wagging, thinking it was my husband or thinking it was me.
Yeah.
There was one night I was in our computer room. I was in university at the time. I was working on a paper. And my two dogs were over in our master bedroom, and it was during the night. So everything was turned off. It was dark. And all of a sudden, both dogs came bolting out of the room, tail tucked, down
Oh,
over the stairs.
man.
Yeah, down over the stairs, both tails tucked, refused to go back upstairs. So of course I went down after them. I wasn't staying up there.
Yeah.
So this was like, even by their reaction, was really negative. And there was one night where I was lying in bed, and this was a time where I used to shut the computer down completely, like when I was done for the night. So it was off, it was powered off. And my mom had sent me in an email a newspaper article of where my brother had actually written into a local newspaper about the stories of when we used to grow up and in the old haunted house. And so anyway, I was lying in bed, and I heard like kind of clicks and dings and stuff, and heard kind of a weird noise. And I went out of the room and went into the computer room. The computer had turned itself on, pulled up the email, and was printing these stories.
Wow.
And like the computer was completely off. So it wasn't just like, oh, it had been queued up and
Yeah, yeah.
somehow got a signal. And so it was printing off literally these stories from when we were growing up. So that really freaked me out. So by this time we were starting to experience things. It was the sightings, and we would hear each other calling out this shape shifting kind of activity that was going on. And like I said, people say, oh yeah, but I'd be able to deal with that. But I don't think people realize when you're in that situation and the atmosphere itself is thick. So
Exactly.
it puts you in an anxious sort of fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
because you can sense something. You can sense something is there. And his brother was staying with us for a while, like actually moved into one of our spare rooms. And he came down over, we still don't know what he experienced, but he came down over the stairs one night and he said, this house is effed, and walked out the door. So the craziest thing that we started experiencing, actually two things. So one thing, and this was happening for months on end, our one dog would stare at the same spot on the wall in our bedroom, the exact same spot, like her nose was almost touching the wall. And we would wake up and she would be facing away from us, staring at the spot on the wall. And we'd have to like clap our hands and call out to her to kind of break her from this, whatever she was staring at.
Yeah.
And it was the exact same spot. I think it was some kind of portal. I really do.
Okay.
Um, and then the last craziest thing that we experienced before I started to actually look into what I think was happening. We were in bed, all the lights were turned off, and we had one of those big dressers that has like 6 drawers in it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, my husband's sock drawer flew out of the dresser across the room and landed about 1.5 feet away from my head and upwards. And there were socks strewn all over the place. And so I turned on a lamp. I couldn't believe my eyes. What
Yeah.
happened? Because usually these drawers have like the safety stops
Yeah. Yeah.
on them, so you can't pull them out. So my ex-husband got out of bed, walked around, struggled to get it back into the dresser, and then came around the bed and went back to sleep. And I'm like, are we going to talk about this?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think at that point he wanted to ignore it, because if you ignore it, it goes away. But it wasn't going, it wasn't going
Yeah.
away.
It's that whole thing, just ignore the bully, they'll go away. But and 9 out of 10 times, that's going to make them want to push you more. And I think throwing it at your head was more of a, hey, I can do this
Yep.
anytime I want. Because it could have thrown it at your head easily. But I do think that darker spirits feed off of our fear. Killing someone would be like taking away their food source. How am I going to eat now if that's gone? You got to use every part of the cow, even the tongue and hooves.
Yeah. And so by this time, I mean, this was kind of, it had really escalated. And there were nights that my husband would be gone to work for night shift, and I would be lying in bed fully awake, completely awake. I had just laid down, and I could feel something in front of my face, and it would just growl. It
Wow.
was this half human, half animalistic growl. And that thing stank. It smelled like, because
Sulfur.
no, it smelled like death
Mhm.
and fecal matter.
Wow.
And I used to work as a paramedic. I know what death smells like. And that thing would sit there and it would growl in my face, and I wouldn't dare open my eyes. I'd wait until I could feel that it was gone, and then I would I would turn on every light in the entire house and then go back to bed. But I think I figured out what was going on here, and this ties into my whole being an empath.
Yeah.
And I think you've probably heard this theory before. Obviously my ex-husband is my ex-husband for a reason.
I don't want to get into that,
Yeah.
But do you think that might have
Yes.
drawn all okay, okay.
Yes. So we know that negativity is drawn to negative atmospheres, negative emotions. And when you have someone who's an empath that can't deal with their emotions, they can project it into the environment and it can create a poltergeist.
Hmm. That's why so many young girls who
Yep.
experience puberty are such targets for these things. One of the few issues with the movie Poltergeist, because at that time in the 80s, young girls wouldn't experience, their woman development at that young of an age. Now it's more common for a younger girl like that to experience their, I'll say, their first periods and all those things.
Mhm. Yep. And I mean, when we moved in together and I was figuring out, this relationship wasn't a great situation, I was only 19 years old.
Okay,
So you
okay.
have a very young empath who is having trouble controlling their own emotions and
Yeah.
and projecting it out into the environment. And that's one thing, a theory, that's one way that it can create a poltergeist. So basically, I was creating it myself, but I was doing it without my own knowledge.
Wow. Now at the time, because I know like you mentioned in a video earlier, you're like a practicing Wiccan, correct?
Yes, I am.
Were you at the time and were you trying to do any protection spells on yourself or the house?
I was, it wasn't really working because I think my own energies were already so off that I didn't have, well, also I was still very young, so I didn't really have the know-how and I didn't really have my own energies in a place where I could protect myself.
Okay, okay.
So, but I did try, but it didn't really work. And of course, that whole situation with being in a bad relationship was still ongoing, right? So
Yeah.
you could try to put a little bit of protection out there, and it wasn't every day. Sometimes we would go through spells that were a little bit okay, and then it would come back with a vengeance. So, that was sort of another thing as well. It wasn't an everyday thing.
Mm. Hey, future Eric, even though we only slightly touched on the topic, still put in that video, that clip you put in the other episode with the hotline for people to call if they need help for being in a bad relationship. Just remember to do that, all right? Because, I always give myself messages when I do a video of things to put in at the beginning so I don't
Yeah,
forget.
yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
So that was, I think I really do think that that's what was going on there. I was creating my own poltergeist because of being such a spiritual empath. I was putting these negative sort of things out into the atmosphere, and other people would come into the house and they would even say, like, it just feels heavy in here.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when we were doing our movie in Texas, there was it was a hunting reserve. So they had a not a kill room, but a room where they would, dress the animals, like, do all of
Yeah.
that stuff to it. And we were filming a scene in there, and man, I've never felt such heaviness. And there was no humans killed there, but no matter what, if you go somewhere and there's a lot of death in it, it's gonna create an atmosphere like that. I
Yeah.
mean, I was tired the whole time we were filming and couldn't wait to get out.
It's very draining when you're in an
Yeah,
atmosphere like that. Very,
yeah.
very draining.
I have as much time as you have, or we can end this now and do a part two. It's up to you. Your time
Well,
is my time.
I just have a couple of more things if you just want to stick it in. And
I have nothing else to do today but writing. Oh, in
okay.
fact, I just want to make sure I put myself on the spot. When I'm done with my script, I would like you to be one of the first few people to read it and give it like a test reading.
Oh, for sure.
It's basically my version of Scream, and I know it all the as you know, if you listen to my channel, I kind of like the late 90s, early 2000s slashers. I know that's a shock for anybody watching my channel that I would like that, even though every one of my videos is about that stuff. But I would like you to be one of the first to read it when it's done.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, cool. But let's get on to this stuff because I'm not showing a lot of emotions, but I do believe everything that you're saying because I believe in this stuff to the fullest. It's just I have a very good poker face.
Oh, so do I.
Oh, okay.
So do I. My resting witch face.
Yeah.
So another thing that kind of ties into the whole kind of story that we've told so far, and that's a reoccurring dream that I used to have ever since I was little, like maybe 3 years old is probably the earliest memory. And I always had this reoccurring dream of, and this is another trope actually, of the man in the top hat. And he was very tall and he kind of scared me just because he was so big and so menacing.
Like a shadow
And
person?
he would always appear in shadow because there was always a light coming behind him, almost like he was standing in a doorway and there was a light coming from behind. And he would always wear a suit and a top hat. And he was always trying to tell me something. He was always trying to tell me something that was very important, but I was always so scared that I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was garbled. And I had this dream over and over and over and over, right on up through. And I still had this reoccurring dream when I was with my ex-husband in this situation where I was creating a poltergeist. And it wasn't until after, I think I was, I don't know, maybe 25, that my mom was doing her family tree. And she was telling me about her grandfather, so my great grandfather, who would come over usually on Sundays. And she said he was a huge man, big man. And he would always wear a three-piece suit with a top hat.
Whoa.
And one thing she specifically said, she said, when he stood in a doorway, he would take up the entire doorway.
Wow.
So Eric, I almost fell off my chair when she was
Yeah.
telling me this because I hadn't told her about this dream that I had been having my whole life. But the funny thing is, from the very moment that I left my ex-husband, never dreamed of him after.
Wow.
So it was, I think he was trying to warn me of this situation.
That's what I was about to say, because I do believe that our relatives that we haven't even met, do watch over us. This is a silly version of it, but did you see the Pixar movie Coco?
I haven't seen it yet. No.
Oh, it's so adorable, but there's a scene where the young boy is seeing his relatives that he never met, but they knew him and everything about him because they would watch over him from the spiritual plane. And I'm guessing since he's your grandfather, great grandfather, and he kind of sounds like a manly man kind of guy
Yep.
from that description, of course, he would be watching over his great granddaughter and wanting to protect her in this type of thing.
Yeah. So it was just, and it like, I mean, you couldn't, just the timing of it, you can't really, because, I was dreaming of him as a kid and then in this relationship and then out of the relationship and all of a sudden he's gone. So, I mean, you
Yeah.
can try to rationalize it, I guess. But to me, he was trying to tell me all along about this relationship for sure.
See, when it comes to spiritual things, I don't believe in coincidences. There's
No.
little things when like, oh, I ate the same hot dog you did. Yeah, that's a coincidence. But when it's you're experiencing, like you were saying, you're experiencing these visitations from spirits as a child. Yeah, your great grandpa is gonna be like, hey, I'm watching over you, sort of a thing. And then in the thing that shall not be talked about, of course you're going to have some sort of someone. Do you think that if you would have been more open and I don't want to say stronger, but stronger at that
Yeah.
point, you would have been able to understand what he was saying? I mean, I'm immediately getting, did you ever watch Twin Peaks?
No, I haven't seen it.
Well, there's a scene in that show where Agent Cooper is speaking to someone and they're talking backwards. and he can't understand what they're saying. So do you think, like you were saying, if you were stronger, he would have been like telling you flat out, this is a warning, you need help, you need to leave?
Yeah, I think so, because like I said, he was kind of scaring me. So it's like I feel like if I didn't have that fear and I knew who it was at the time,
Yeah.
that I could have gotten closer to him and to find out exactly what it was that he was trying to tell me.
Wow, this is all, I mean, you need to write a book, turn it a
I'm
little
working on it.
fictional. Okay, fictional or biography.
Yeah, so it's funny how everything kind of ties in together, hey?
Yeah.
It I don't even really have to do a whole lot of work. I just need to write down exactly what happened, and I think people would be interested in it.
Again, do you plan on self-publishing or getting it out there on trying to sell it to something, to
Yeah,
someone?
probably self-publishing. I think it's they make it so easy now to.
Um, I kind of work with that. Me and Larry, we got your back when you're ready to do all
Hey,
that,
perfect.
helping you get it onto things and everything. Because we're doing that for someone right now. This lady we do a podcast with. I'll tell you about it another time. Well, let's say she's a colonist. You know what colonics are?
Yep.
She does that and wrote a book called Shit Isn't a Dirty Word. And that's the name of the podcast. And I get paid to talk about that.
That's
That's what I
crazy.
do for a living. And we're getting her book out. So when you're ready, all you need to do is write it, and me and Larry will help you promote it and things like that.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So let's get on some more of these stories that, oddly enough, these are going to comfort me while I sleep, while most people would be terrified. Like, I used to fall asleep listening to the Anything Ghost podcast. Have you ever
Oh
heard
my
that?
God, that's my favorite
I
podcast,
love
like
that
ever.
so much. That was the second podcast I got into when I got my first iPhone.
That's hilarious. My husband and I at night, because I have a little speaker on my side of the bed, we'll
Okay.
put on Lex and listen to Anything Ghost while
Oh,
we
it's
go to
so
sleep.
awesome. I
Yeah.
haven't paid to get the membership yet.
Oh, do it. Do it.
Yeah.
It's like 20 bucks for a lifetime membership. It's totally worth it.
See, I didn't know it was 20 bucks. Now I gotta do it. My favorite was always the Halloween episodes where
Yeah.
people would send in real stories or fake
I
stories.
actually sent him a story.
Was it ever on, or
Yep. I believe it was January 2019.
I gotta go? You know what? I get paid on Wednesday, so I'm gonna pay the 20 bucks for it and listen to that one.
Yeah, it's Lex is awesome and he really has the voice for it.
He really does. We were Facebook friends for a while. When I was promoting my movie, The Percipient, I was trying to get onto his show, but it never worked out.
Oh wow. Yeah, no, he's great. Love that show.
Yeah, it's maybe I've listened to a lot of supernatural podcasts, not
Mhm.
about the show Supernatural. I need to check that one out, but like ghosts and stuff. There's one now. Have you heard of the Skinwalker Ranch?
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
a whole podcast based on the show that Netflix did. They break it down episode by episode.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to look into that
Yeah.
one. I haven't heard of that one.
But one more podcast I gotta mention, the greatest podcast of all time, not one of mine, but it's just so interesting. Remember the movie Cats that came out?
Mhm.
There's a podcast completely dedicated to breaking down every scene pretty much from
Oh,
the
from the movie.
adaptation of Cats.
That's
This is
interesting.
called levity, folks, so we can get back into the ghosty stuff.
So, my current husband, my wonderful partner, Matthew, is also a spirit sensitive. Funny enough, he wasn't supposed to be born.
Okay.
His mom had had, I believe, 4 or 5 miscarriages.
Oh my goodness.
And he has an adopted brother and sister, because they had adopted because they thought they were never going to be able to have a baby.
Yeah.
And when she finally got pregnant with him, because she had had so much trouble, of course, the doctor was like, don't expect that you're going to have a baby. And so he wasn't supposed to be born, and he was, and he is also a spirit sensitive. So we have a very interesting household.
I
We
could
have a very active
imagine
household.
so, yeah.
But my husband has really, really interesting stories. But I'll just tell you the one that's really
Would
crazy, and
he
then
be
one that's,
interested in doing a part two, like coming on with you
I'd have to
sometime?
ask him because he's pretty shy.
Okay, okay. But if
But
he's
if we
willing
do it
to,
together, he might
that's
be
what I
willing to
meant.
play it.
Like both of you, like we can do a part two to this sometime.
Yeah, yeah. If he's willing, I will absolutely have him come on.
Okay, cool,
Absolutely.
cool.
But one thing that happened to him, his father and I believe his uncle and himself were out fishing one day, and a storm started to roll in. So they were like, let's cast for the last time, basically, and then we're gonna get off the water because there's a thunderstorm coming. So he had his line out in the water, and he actually experienced St. Elmo's fire around the top of his fishing
Whoa.
pole. So he saw like the sparkly lights around the top of his fishing pole. And so anyway, they went in, and within a week, he lost all pigmentation in one of his eyebrows, his eyelashes, and some of the skin on one side of his face.
Wow.
And he went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Oh yeah, no, that's a coincidence." And Matt's like, "I don't think it is."
Yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence. But yes, still he has one white eyebrow, and his eyelashes and everything are completely white.
Wow.
So he's had lots of experiences, like I said, and we've had lots of experiences together. Nothing ever negative here because we have a very, very loving household.
Okay.
Um,
And you're stronger now in your beliefs, and
yes,
I'm guessing your ability to put protection spells
yeah.
and stuff like that upon yourself and your house.
Yeah, and we do regular cleansings. I do have to be careful with our cleansings because I don't want the spirits that are here that are watching over us to leave, just any negative energy.
Yeah.
But we had a really interesting experience back in November. Was it November of 2019? I believe it was November of 2019. So we had just gotten home from getting groceries, and we were starting to put stuff away, and Matt was bringing stuff downstairs to put in our deep freeze that we have in our basement. And I'll just preface this by saying, unfortunately, Matt lost his mom years ago from complications of alcoholism, and that kind of plays into the story.
Okay.
So he came downstairs, and he called out to me, and he said, "Come down for a second." And I thought to myself, "Oh my God, there's a leak, or there's mice, or there's whatever. So I think there's something bad." So I come down and walk into our laundry room, and it was just like I hit a wall, and all I could smell was alcohol.
Whoa.
It smelled like whiskey. And I said, "Did you leave a glass of liquor down here or something?" He said, "No." And I started to get the feeling, because when there's a spirit around, I get this very tingly feeling, and it starts at the top of my head, comes down to my shoulders. It's kind of like almost like water washing over you.
Okay.
And I knew there was something there. And I said, "Matt," I said, "I think there's something here." And not negative, but I just knew that there was
Yeah.
something there. So we went back upstairs, and I had an idea in my head, but I didn't mention anything. So we went back upstairs, and he said, "What date is it?" I said, "It's like November 29th or whatever the date was."
Yeah.
He said, "My mom died exactly 10 years ago today
Whoa.
of complications from alcoholism."
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we walked into the laundry room, it smelled just like Golden Wedding, which was her favorite drink.
Okay.
And I said to him, I said, "I can't believe you're saying this." I said, "Because I feel like it was your mom." And
Wow.
I said, "But why would she be in the basement?" And he said, "Because she's terrified of dogs.
Oh.
And we have two dogs that were on the
Wow.
main floor." So I had an experience, he had an experience. We put two and two together, and it was exactly 10 years
Wow.
since she had died.
Now, I just have to ask this. Do you keep alcohol in the house? So just so
Well,
we
we,
can a good investigator of this thing will look for any
yeah,
logical reason.
right.
I believe you, but just for integrity's sakes on both of us, we need to look at all the
Right.
other
So
factors.
yes, we do keep alcohol in the house, but he keeps it on top of the fridge
Oh, okay, okay.
upstairs. And we specifically looked to see if either he or someone had had a glass of alcohol
Yeah, yeah.
and brought it into that room. There was nothing. So the very next morning, so we didn't touch anything. We looked around to see if we could see anything, nothing. So the very next morning, first thing we did, this was a Saturday morning, we came downstairs and went into that room. It was warm, it was inviting, zero smell of alcohol.
Wow.
So, like, you can say, yeah, okay, well, there was alcohol in there, but there was nothing. And then we went in there the very next morning, nothing.
Wow. It was just that special moment for
Yeah.
him. I totally believe that. This is going to sound kind of silly, but I had something similar to that. Me and my grandmother, Sally, were extremely close. She practically raised me, and TV and movies was our thing. We used to watch The Arrow and Flash all the time. In fact, I would not go certain places on Wednesday and Tuesday just so we could watch our shows together. When she passed away, I deleted the season pass of The Flash and Arrow from my DVR because I couldn't watch it. Elizabeth, for months after that, The Flash and Arrow were still recording. Even though I went in and made sure that they weren't being
Yeah.
recorded, they still constantly were. It freaked me out.
Yeah. She, it was kind of like her saying, no, I still want you to enjoy the
Yeah,
show.
yeah, yeah. But again, I totally believe that that was just a special thing for your husband, for him at that time. Were they very close
Yes.
or okay, so then I think it was like a hey, remember me, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the fact that it was exactly 10 years to the day since she passed, you can't get any better than that.
Exactly. I think if it would have even been nine, again, numbers do, I think, well, numbers might matter, they might not, but I think if it would have been 8 or 9 years, it wouldn't have happened. But it being a decade is so much,
Yeah.
even though it's just one more year than nine, a decade just feels so much bigger than 9 years.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I could listen all day, but if you need to go, we could, end this and do a part two.
Yeah. Let's stop here and then I'll see if Matt wants to come on and we'll talk about some of his stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Since this is something special, I'm not going to do my usual sign off, but all of Elizabeth's links will be in the description of this. Thank you, everybody, and have an awesome day.